second-year nursing faculty here at NIC. We've had a really nice convocation week this week. Lots of thought-provoking speakers, and our speaker today promises to add to that. With us today is Johnny Cox. He is the staff ethicist at Sacred Heart Medical Center in Spokane, Washington. In this capacity, he serves as the professional resource person for physicians and employees regarding the moral or value dimensions of healthcare choices. He is one of only a few persons working full-time as a clinical ethicist in the United States at a medical center outside of a university. His educational background includes a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Seattle University, a master's degree in theology from the University of Notre Dame, a PhD in social ethics from the Claremont Graduate School in California. He was a dean of students at the Claremont colleges before coming to Gonzaga University in 1972, where he was a professor of Christian ethics until he left to become director of the Human and Health Values Program at Providence Medical Center in Seattle. He assumed his current position at Sacred Heart in 1982. Johnny and his wife Barb were the co-founders of Hospice of Spokane, the first hospice to provide clinical care in the Pacific Northwest. So let's give a warm welcome to Johnny Cox.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for coming. I taught long enough that I know never to take for granted people in the chairs. So I must tell you, I sought from my wife some advice this morning. I did teach for 8 years, and I taught early morning classes, and when I realized my place in the program, which was the fourth day of the week, and it was an hour earlier than most of the presentations had started, I asked Barb, with whom I have worked very closely, if she had any tips for me on how to make the presentation. And she thought for a minute, and then she said, well, Johnny, you remember back when we were starting the hospice program for people that were terminally ill? I said, I do. She said, well, I suggest that you give your talk the same way you want to die. Well, that took me back, and I reflected on that for a moment, and then it dawns on me. I says, oh, Barb, I know what you mean. You mean keep them awake and alert. Because that is, in fact, the way I would like to die, kind of with my shoes on. But she immediately says, no. So I was stumped, and I said, well, Barb, for goodness sakes, what do you mean? She says, make it quick and painless. So I hope it will be quick and painless, but also informative. I have tried to structure my remarks this morning, given my place in Convocation Week, which is following some folks who have talked about the search for meaning, ideas of holistic health care, looking at meditation as a technique to pursue that search for meaning. And I would like to blend, as my own background might indicate, the humanities and a very practical, daily focus upon healthcare decision making. The program indicates that my subject is ethical decisions for health, and the way I want to address that is by beginning with some general notions of my idea of health and ethics, then look at some choices, and we'll do this very briefly, with regard to lifestyle decisions. And then finally, I would like to spend the focus part of my remarks on the very difficult ethical decisions regarding life support systems, when literally we come up against dying in a way that we discover the meaning of living, and we are faced with some of the most difficult choices we ever encounter during our own journey here on earth. So that's the approach I'm going to take this morning. I appreciated Chris introducing me as the staff ethicist, because that is correct. I'm frequently confused with anesthetists, and I don't want you to get confused that way this morning. It's hard to describe what I do, because in fact there's only one other person in the country who's doing this work, and well, I got an insight into my own work from my 7-year-old son just about Labor Day. I'd like to share this with you. He woke up in the middle of the night having a bad dream. He was crying, and I walked across the hallway, sat down next to him, and comforted him, consoled him, and finally Mike calmed down, and he says, "Oh, Daddy, I'm so glad you're an ethicist." I know an opportunity when I see one. So I said, "Oh, Mike, it makes me feel so good that you're happy I'm an ethicist. Mike, what's an ethicist?" He says, "Oh, Daddy, it means you're halfway between a doctor and a nurse." And I think you'll find in my comments this morning some of that bridging the gap, some of that being halfway between the professional focus on technological application in healthcare and some of it on the more person caring, receiving and making sense out of what's happening to me as I make healthcare choices. First of all, the way I understand health. And here I've put together a conceptual framework, to use a fancy word, or just a concept of health that I hope will blend with what you've already heard during Convocation Week with regard to holistic health care. It's my way of highlighting what health professionals have known for a long time, which is simply to be not sick doesn't count for being healthy. In other words, it's not an either-or situation. To be healthy is a continuum concept. And this is the way I try to describe the varying levels of wellness and illness that we experience in our own health. And it has to do with maintaining an equilibrium between 4 key relationships that I will submit to you are essential in every human being's life. Now, the outermost relationship, one with our environment, are those areas where we're concerned about public health, occupational safety concerns. We know that there are various impacts today regarding asbestos in the walls of our schools. We're concerned about the aquifer in this community. We pride ourselves in the Pacific Northwest for having a fairly pollution-free environment that is healthy for us. And so we know that the way we maintain our interface with our environment makes a difference in how healthy we are. The next relationship, the social one, has to do with our interaction with the key groups of persons with whom we work every day. And I've listed 3 there, as you can see, the 3 groups of people that I believe we spend most of our time with. By family, I mean the persons with whom we dwell. For some of you, that might be a college roommate right now. For some of us, it might be our family of origin. For others, a family by marriage. A variety of ways in which we household, we make a home together. Those of us who are employed full-time spend the majority of our prime waking time with our co-workers. So when you hear about corporate culture and you hear about reducing stress in the work environment and so on, these are pivotal health concerns. If we aren't in harmony in our workplace, but if there is a cacophony where we're grating, it's going to make a difference in how healthy we are. By neighbors, I don't mean the people who live in the house next door or the apartment above you, but rather the people with whom we spend our leisure time, our friends with whom we recreate ourselves, where we find invigoration. If things are well in our relationships with the people we spend our lives with, we'll be healthy. To the extent that they're out of sync, it's going to take its toll on our health. The next relationship, which is the one that I believe is most frequently meant by holistic health care, by persons who promote health programs, wellness endeavors, tells us the truth that if we are not constantly integrating the physical, emotional, intellectual aspects of our lives, we will be disintegrating. The person who runs Bloomsday, the person who can do a triathlon, the tip-top physical conditioned athlete may have a stress ulcer. That person is not as healthy as she could be. I don't tend to get too stressed but I do tend to eat too many hot fudge sundaes. And because of that, I'm not as healthy as I could be, especially because in my family, our healthcare Achilles heel is cardiovascular disease. I was served oatmeal this morning. Barb told me she read Scott Pritchard last Wednesday, that if you eat some oats every day, it'll take care of your cholesterol. So I'm probably going to see more Quaker oats than I ever dreamed the rest of my life. But that'll be healthy for me. The innermost relationship, the one which I will be emphasizing today, the one that if Professor Ford were speaking this morning, he'd be talking about when he discussed the search for meaning, is that most intimate relationship we have with the ultimate concern in our life. Now, for me, that happens to be God. And so I might refer to this relationship as the religious dimension of my health. But I am very much aware that in addition to theists, we have agnostics, we have atheists, and as one lady was quick to point out to me, we also have anti-theists. I was doing this same overview here about 2 years ago now, and when I got done, a lady came up to me and she says, I appreciated your sensitivity to recognizing that not everybody believes in a God, because I call this the spiritual relationship, to acknowledge that for many, many people it isn't religious because God doesn't play a part, but everybody does have an ultimate concern. But this woman approached me and she said, you didn't mention me. She said, you said theists and atheists and agnostic, but I believe in God, I just got a grudge. So now I add anti-theist. Wherever we fit in any of those categories or when we make up ourselves, every person in this room finally has some ultimate value foundation in our life that we acknowledge as the very pivot around which all of the significant choices in our life revolve. It may be a project to complete, it may be a family commitment, it may be God, it may be big bucks, but every single person, finally, in their heart of hearts, has some ultimate concern that I believe is the very wellspring of health. I believe that this ultimate concern, these highest value priorities, are the dynamism, the power that allows us to integrate the other relationships. And so where I work, we have persons who come in as patients who are in tip-top physical condition. They seem to have the world by the table in terms of a successful career and a vibrant social life and friends all over the place, who are on suicide watch in our psychiatric unit because they had no core, and it was just a matter of time until they collapsed within themselves. If in our search for meaning we fail, we will be finally very sick. Ethics, then, is concerned especially with this value dimension of our lives. If we are not able to come to a kind of ease with our own deepest values and our lifestyle and particular choices, we will be diseased. So the point I want to make is that ethics with regard to healthcare choices is not special. The worst thing that could happen today, given the media coverage, when on my way over this morning on the NPR radio report, there was a quotation from the heart transplant surgeon at the University of Washington. In last night's paper, there was a discussion with regard to what's going on with AIDS. My concern is that ethics and healthcare not become a special category that's the realm of experts. It isn't. Ethics is not special. It is not extraordinary. Ethics is ordinary. It's not special, but it is essential. Every one of us takes ethics seriously. It isn't the province of experts, but of every person. What does ethics do? Well, ethics allows us a rather thoroughgoing approach to understanding how I want to act in light of who I want to be. I mean, on a thumbnail, ethics is simply making the decisions, adopting the attitudes that square with my basic values. Simple as that. We do it every day. When I look toward the meaning of ethics for healthcare professionals, I add one little twist to that. Just like medicine and nursing is a combination of science and art, so also ethics must blend knowledge of principles, understanding of method, with the deftness, the ability to apply the principle in this particular choice today. If a doctor knew everything there was to know about lung disease, but didn't know how to talk to a patient, that person might be a medical doctor, but not a physician, because physicians are able to help people become healed. If I was an expert in ethics and stood here and lectured to you in abstract philosophical terms that left you wondering what I had said when I stopped, I have been no good to you. It might be fine for me to write a book for other scholars, and that has its place. But to take ethics seriously in our daily healthcare choices, we have to be able to apply the principles in practice. And nobody can do that for me. I can't turn to the Pope or to the President or to a professor or to a parent and have them tell me what to do and shirk my responsibility. I can seek advice and counsel and insight from those folks, but finally the buck stops here. So it's important to take ethics seriously, just as we take seriously dietary kinds of concerns, exercise, environment. Ethics isn't special, but it's essential. I would like to begin then to look at a few of the choices we make with regard to lifestyle decisions. And I am confident that you're familiar with very many of these already. I'm going to divide them into those choices we make that impact other people, and then those choices we make that fashion ourselves. With regard to the choices we make impacting other people, I want to look for a moment at our culture's bias. Especially here in the Northwest, we are rugged individualists. It's very important for us to not get into the other guy's turf, especially when it's a very personal, intimate decision, such as healthcare choices. While that has its value, it also has a disadvantage. And the disadvantage is nobody lives alone. No matter how private and intimately personal a choice might be, it's going to impact other people. And so I want to start with a distinction that will respect every individual's conscience, but will also acknowledge that together we form a community of responsibility. And that distinction is the distinction between the justification of an action in terms of values and principles and the moral responsibility of the person who does the action. For instance, ethics is about trying to determine if certain actions are good, bad, right, or wrong. We need to know where we stand with regard to the use of drugs. We need to know our position regarding mandatory seatbelt laws. We need to know a lot of specific value-laden choices according to our own convictions. because I have to be able to stand for what I believe in, and as a member of this community, I have a social duty to do my best to fashion society in keeping with what I consider to be the principles of human dignity and life. So I want to suggest first that we know our own positions well enough that we can assertively state them in the public arena. That we can give our reasons, convincing reasons, for what we believe is right and good. On the other hand, I want to warn you, don't slip into judging people who do things different than you. The moral responsibility of the agent, of the person who eats hot fudge sundaes, okay, is beyond our purview of judgment. I need to know what is responsible nutritional behavior. First of all, so I can make my own choices, and then secondly, so I can try to influence the direction of our community. But that does not mean that I should go about judging whether somebody else should be damned or made a saint. I don't think that's the province of any human being toward another. Every one of us in our heart of hearts, in our deepest conscience, struggles with the moral choices we make. We're accountable for them according to whether society can justify them or not. But that does not mean that we have the authorization to start judging, either to praise or to blame other people. But now try to do that in practice. Try to tell your roommate that you think their drinking is hurting them without them hearing you. Who are you? What are you doing, wearing a halo this semester? In your families, try to convey your conviction that a particular action is really worthwhile without other people feeling you push them to do it like you're doing it. For a nurse to state with assertiveness that she believes the truth ought to be told to this patient, and the family who's withholding the truth, or the doctor who's refusing to tell the truth, is going to hear that as a judgment. Are you calling me a liar? I'm asking you to balance two very important moral principles. On the one side, know yourself so you can be assertive about what I believe, but do not slip into judging other people's particular choices. If we can't accomplish this, our society will deteriorate into a you do your thing and I'll do my thing ethic, in which we're never able to stand behind a microphone or in front of a city council or in a classroom and say, this is what I believe, I would like you to consider it seriously. We have to be able to separate these two things. You know why it's so hard to do it? We gossip a lot. We constantly, in our informal chatter, talk about the decisions other people make in a judging way. And since we know we do that all the time casually, it's very hard to separate them when an issue has come forward that must be discussed, debated, and finally decided. And I think it's a very, very important distinction. Having said that then, what does that mean for lifestyle decisions that impact others? Well, what I'm suggesting is we go right out into the forefront of public debate and let people know where we stand with regard to smoking in public places, with regard to seatbelt use, with regard to drinking and driving. That we make our voices heard in the democratic process that our society gifts us with. Just yesterday, the Soviet dissident was released. It's another opportunity for us to remember how fortunate we are to live in this land. And yet if we do not exercise our convictions in the public arena with regard to these lifestyle choices that impact others, our apathy is a worse sin than the Soviet repression. To have the opportunity and to disregard it is ultimate evil. So know where I stand and step forward with my convictions. And every one of us is going to have a different focus. For some it may be smoking, for others it might be the seat belts, for some it might be the water pollution, for some it's going to be the land and the environment of this beautiful part of the country. Know where we stand and go forward. Choices that fashion ourselves. Here we get into a very sensitive area of ethical choices for health, in which we wrestle with our own imperfections. I know I shouldn't eat hot fudge sundaes, and yet it's hard for me to pass them by when I'm sitting down, especially at a Haagen-Dazs ice cream counter. None of us is ever, with regard to our own health, going to achieve the ideal and the goal that we set for ourselves. Because we're people, we're human beings. We have creativity and we have creaturely limits. And so what I really want to suggest is that the most important choice we make regarding our own lifestyle is that we live with our limits. That we acknowledge we're just folks, not super persons. That we always try to get closer to those ideals and goals that we set for ourselves, but that we not be too hard on ourselves if we fall short, because that's part and parcel of being a human being. I was in a nursing home yesterday giving a talk on living wills. We'll get to that in just a minute. And I bumped onto a gentleman who was 104 years old. Crisp, alert. I asked him, "You have any words of advice? I'm going to give this talk tomorrow to mostly young people, and one of the things I'm talking about is health and lifestyle. Any words of wisdom?" He says, "Well, Sonny," said, "if I'd have known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of my health." We never know where our journey will take us, but what we do know is that every day we have opportunities to make the decisions that square with our own values and our own convictions. And it's to take advantage of that opportunity that is probably the fundamental moral option of our lives, to not pass by the gift of the moment, to take advantage of what we have. I'd like to make the transition now to the last phase of my remarks that has to do with one of the most difficult kinds of healthcare choices that any of us will ever face, and that has to do with life-death decisions regarding the use of medical technology. Since Karen Ann Quinlan, this has been a media concern in the United States. It has become, in fact, the interface of legal and moral and professional concerns in medicine and nursing, with numerous court decisions as well as legislative statutes. My focus is not so much on the social aspect of this immensely important issue, but rather on the family perspective. Yesterday morning, I was talking with a woman who was in her mid-50s, whose husband was being maintained on a ventilator. Over a period of 3 years, because of a chronic breathing problem, his health had deteriorated to the point where he probably wasn't going to live much longer. And then on Sunday evening, he passed out at home, was brought in an ambulance to the hospital, and maintained alive through the use of the advanced technology of ventilation. She was talking to me because she had to now make a choice with regard to maintaining or discontinuing that ventilator support. And I couldn't help, after I had a chance to visit with her for a half hour, of thinking how this morning, for most of us, that type of choice will seem so very, very far removed from February 13th, 1986. You know, Kubler-Ross, in talking about death and dying, used the phrase, "Death is always for thee, but not for me." Well, I believe that is also maybe a defense mechanism that we use when we think about these hard choices. But I want to assure you that it's a very common experience for families to wrestle with these choices. Over the last 12 years, as I've been speaking on this subject, I've taken an informal poll of groups ranging from participants such as yourself, to Rotary clubs, to church organizations, to health professionals, and I've asked how many of you already in your personal life have been involved in making one of these life-death choices. And what I have found is that it runs approximately 30% of just the everyday guy and gal on the street. Let me ask, show your hands. How many of you have already been involved in making such a choice? Look around the room. Keep your hands up for just a minute. Look around the room. Just about the same. So as I begin my comments, please know this is our concern, not somebody else's problem. A few remarks. I believe, and this has been endorsed by the United States President's Commission for the Study of Ethics in Medicine, that we do have a moral duty to use reasonable forms of medical treatment that give us an expectation of maintaining our health or prolonging our life, so long as they don't cause undue burdens. There is a group of people in our country who would deny this. They would be ultimate libertarians, if you would, who would say that the only moral duty I have is to do whatever I want to do. And our country, prizing our pluralism, respects that in law. In law, any competent adult can refuse any and all medical treatment. And if we try to do it to them against their will, we're guilty of battery. The President's Commission knows the law. They were saying there's still a moral duty to use reasonable treatments that offer an expectation of benefit without burdens. So if while I'm talking with you today, I develop pain in my side, and after we're done, I go over to Kootenai Medical Center and I'm diagnosed to have appendicitis, would a reasonably healthy, although somewhat overweight, 42-year-old have a moral duty to have the appendectomy in order to restore my health? Well, is it available? I'm certain there's a surgeon here in town who'd love to do it. Okay. Does it offer a reasonable expectation of benefiting me? Clearly. Are the burdens that would offset the benefit present? Probably not. Relatively simple surgery, short-term convalescence. I then believe I would have the moral obligation to use that medical treatment to prolong my life, restore my health. What about the options? The President's Commission identified two standards according to which we would have the moral option to either use or to refuse the treatment. The first one is futility or uselessness. No one is ethically obliged to do what is absurd. If it is very clear that all the medical treatment would do is prolong my dying or procrastinate the moment of my death, then I can take it or leave it. If I would like to hang on a little longer, fine. But if I would prefer at that point non-invasive techniques, to stay in my home rather than to be sent to a hospital, I have that option. No quibble. To do what is futile is never a moral obligation. But now watch. When I was still a student nurse about 10 years ago, I was taking care of an 18-year-old young man who was in the very final stages of leukemia. he was going to die maybe that week, no more than 10 days. While taking care of him, a 15-year-old girl who looked to me like a volleyball player from a local high school came in, and she was a very sick gal. She had a fulminating pneumonia, just a raging pneumonia. And we found out what bug she had, and we found out the antibiotic that would take care of that pneumonia. Now, in terms of these two moral principles of ethical obligation and ethical option, would you consider the use of that antibiotic for this girl to be obligatory or optional? Obligatory. Certainly. It's available, offers a reasonable expectation of improving her health. Are the burdens out of whack with the benefits? No. While we were giving her the antibiotic, the 18-year-old developed a pneumonia. And we cultured the bug and got its sensitivity and had the antibiotic right there. In terms of our ethical principles, was the use of that antibiotic obligatory or optional? Optional. It was available, but did it offer any expectation of benefiting him? Maybe for comfort, and he had the option to say, I don't like what's going on in my chest, stop it. I've lived with this leukemia long enough, I can live with it some more. But he also had the option of refusing the antibiotic in allowing his death to occur. Now, the point I want to make is this. There's a myth in our society that I would like to dispel. Many, many good folks like you and me erroneously think we are always duty-bound to use medical treatments that are simple or ordinary or routine or everyday. Wrong. When the treatment, no matter how simple, would be futile in terms of restoring health, there is never a moral duty to use it, no matter how simple as an antibiotic. This is not a controverted statement. I'm not trying to put one over on you now, as though it were my opinion that was on a fringe. This is mainstream moral opinion endorsed by the President's Commission in the United States. And I would hope, personally, if you take any one piece of information with you after the presentation this morning, it would be this one. If you have previously thought that you're always duty-bound to use what is medically simple or routine or ordinary, please discard that myth and recognize that when the treatment's futile, any and every treatment may be refused. The other standard the President's Commission adopted had to do with the burdensomeness of the treatment, and basically stated, it indicates that when the burdens are greater than the benefits, the patient has the option to choose or to refuse it. 4 weeks ago, the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the most prestigious medical publication in the United States, published a study that got lots of TV and newspaper coverage. The study was done over a 10-year period of time in a kidney dialysis center in Minnesota. And of the many hundreds of persons in this program, over a 10-year span of time, 12% of the patients died because they chose to stop dialysis. These were not persons who were dying of other diseases. These were not persons who were depressed or psychologically imbalanced. These were persons who were benefiting from the dialysis, but reached a point where they determined, in keeping with their personal values and priorities, that the benefit of prolonged life was not worth the burdens that they incurred through the dialysis. Is that a legitimate moral choice? Certainly it is. You've heard the phrase, the cure is worse than the disease. That's what we're talking about. Every one of us, when we are facing these life-death choices in our own lives, or when we are in the position, and I'm going to move to in just a moment, of being the surrogate for another, must wrestle with our evaluation of the medical information that's the basis for the choice, because while every worthwhile decision in healthcare must be founded upon the very best of medical expertise regarding diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment alternatives, finally, the choices are made in accord with the personal values and preferences of the patient, of you and me. Vince Lombardi would never punt on third down. John Wayne wouldn't have gone into his grave with his 6-gun in his holster. Some folks are going to pull out all the stops, no matter what the burdens, as long as there's the slimmest hope that they will recover. Others of us live life closer to the vest. We don't run those kinds of risks in our daily life, and we would not choose to run those kinds of risks when it came to life support systems and medical treatment. Well, where does this lead us? It leads us very clearly to the importance of talking now with our loved ones about the decisions that may need to be made for us later, what have been called advanced directives. And in the back of the room today, provided through the nursing department, is one type of living will. Yeah, you're free to take them on your way out. I don't care so much if you write a living will, but I do hope that you will seriously consider discussing your values, your preferences, your priorities with the loved ones in your life who may have to stand in for you if a choice needs to be made and you're not capable. Yesterday the roads were pretty bad, huh? When I was driving to this nursing home yesterday to give my talk, an automobile accident happened right ahead of me. The ambulance was just arriving when I came upon the scene. It was a late model Honda, and I just thought to myself, these people who were severely injured in this automobile accident never would have dreamed when they said goodbye in the morning or dropped the kids off at school that somebody in their family may be having to make one of these choices later in the day. And yet, I thought about it driving over here this morning. I hope you will think about it. And not just think about it, but talk about it with your own loved ones. Let them know what your own druthers are. Share with them the preferences and the priorities that for you are most important. Why? The surrogate's duty, the family member or friend who is left to make the choice when we can't choose for ourselves, has the moral responsibility of making the decision we asked them to make. Their ethical duty is not to make the choice they think is best. Their ethical duty is to do what we asked them to do, if ever that came to us. Isn't that what a living will says? A living will, no matter which form it takes, always says, if ever I am in an incurable situation and a choice has to be made about medical treatment and I am not able to make it, and then we tell them what we want. It is very, very painful for families to ever have to make one of these choices. But I assure you, and I hope you will listen well, the one consolation that a family can have is to know what their loved one wanted. It doesn't take away much pain. It certainly doesn't make the decision any easier. But 2 years, 10 years down the line, when you wake up in the middle of the night and wonder, did we do what was best? If you know you did what you were asked, you'll be able to go back to sleep. So that I would urge you, make your desires known to your loved ones, and hopefully you can begin a conversation with regard to ethical choices for life support in which they tell you their preferences and priorities. Now, I know that's easier said than done. I figured I'd better try this in my own family And the opportunity arose 3 years ago. My parents live in the Sacramento area of California. And we had a family reunion at Thanksgiving time. The day after Thanksgiving, my dad and I, and maybe like a lot of men, I guess you heard that from one of the first speakers in Convocation Week, that men have different interactions with other men than they do with women. I don't share real deeply with my dad on an emotional level. But we were playing golf on the day after Thanksgiving, and I decided, pleasant thought today, isn't it? And I decided about the 16th hole. This is the time to bring it up. So I said, Pop, and he's healthy. At that time he was 63, just recently retired, in good physical condition. I said, Pop, have you ever given any thought to the kinds of decisions you'd want made if, anything happened to your heart, or you're in an accident or something? Have you ever thought about the kinds of choices you'd want made for you if you couldn't speak for yourself? Well, Johnny, I haven't, but that's important. I was feeling great. He says, that's really basic, and I'll think about it, and I'll write you a letter. Well, he never writes, so I thought I'd really made contact. Lo and behold, the week before Christmas, here comes an envelope with his handwritten scrawl on it. I tear it open, and inside there's a single sheet of paper. On one side of the paper was all the property he wanted me to sell, and on the other side, the property he wanted me to keep. Now, those are important choices, all right, but they weren't the ones I was trying to get to. There is a bit of a happy ending to that story. Just last fall, both of my folks sat down with a younger brother and talked it out. In fact, they even did something that you can do in California. They filled out a durable power of attorney, which means that if both my mom and dad were not capable of making a choice at the same time, they assigned my brother the legal authority to make these healthcare choices for them. And I must confess to you, I had mixed feelings. I was very glad that they had done it, but I was somewhat sad that they hadn't done it with me. Because I'm the eldest. I brought it up. But I wasn't the right one for my own folks. So I don't know if you'll be the right one for your kids or for your parents, but I urge you to give it a try. And just one last comment on this. When you choose someone to be your spokesperson, when you seek the one that you want to speak for you if you're not able to speak for yourself, make sure you pick somebody you can count on, because their duty is to do what you want them to do. I have asked my wife. Barb and I have filled out a living will. We've talked to our doctor about it. We know what we want. And that changes, by the way. We made some changes in how far we want treatment to go just last Christmas. And I'm confident Barb will follow through. But I'd never ask my mother. Because in the 42 years of my life, my mother's never done what I wanted her to do. She thought she knew best. And I say that to you half in jest, whole in earnest. Be sure you ask somebody you can count on to follow through for you. Well, to try to bring together then these few points with regard to ethical choices in healthcare, I want to conclude by highlighting a critical aspect of healthcare decisions. I'd like to call your attention to what is probably, at least for healthcare professionals, and I believe also for family members, the greatest tragedy that can occur in healthcare. And that is for a person to live or die with an illness or an injury without discovering some meaning in their experience. In other words, for a person to be victimized by their disease or their injury. Many of us have seen patients who were cured physically, who went into long-term remission, who were never again healthy because they lacked the will to live. They didn't have that inner dynamism or power that allowed them to make sense out of what was happening to them and to really go on living rather than simply existing. On the other hand, many of us know persons who are disabled but who are not handicapped by their impairment. Somehow, they have discovered a source of vitality to meet the challenges that they faced, to integrate those 4 relationships that make up being healthy. We have known people who have faced terminal disease and really made their dying their final stage of growth. I suggest that it's right here, with this will to live, this power, this dynamism, for each of us as well as for our nation, that we come to the critical juncture of ethical decisions for health. Our personal and our societal convictions about the ultimate sources of vitality, of health, and of power will determine whether the ethical challenges pressing upon us now from all sides in healthcare, personal and social, will drown us in a cataclysm of fear and despair, or whether these same challenges, the same pressures, will catalyze our hopes and motivate our creative energies to fashion a healthier self and a healthier society. That is our challenge. Good luck. I think you'll need it. Godspeed. I know you'll have it.
Thank you very much. That was very nice. Johnny will be in the Bonner room following for some question and answers. I encourage you all to come and share your questions with him. Thank you.
You can come over later. Okay. Sorry.